Now let's bring in my political panel, Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor MP Catherine King. Gang, how is everyone tonight? I hope everyone is safe and has been tested and vaccinated and ready for a good chat.
Certainly ready for a chat and
raring to go.
Now, I'll start with you, Tim. Protests across the country this weekend. I can't even believe it. Even in Western Australia alone, where they don't even have COVID in the community, 1,000 people descended on an anti-lockdown protest. Do you think that these gatherings of people have shown that the Australian public have finally had enough?
Well, we've had protests before, and so I don't think they're particularly unique, but I just think we should always start from the basic principle, which is we expect people to adhere to the law and to exercise public health measures to make sure that these protests don't become a pathway for a mass outbreak, which could actually extend the lockdowns that they're complaining or criticising against. So I don't think these are a reflection of it. I think the frustration of millions of Australians all around the country are a sign that people are starting to come to terms with the fact that Delta variant has changed the game, as it were, that unlike the Alpha variant last year, where it has been a pathway where we can fight it through lockdowns and other measures to stop it, that the Delta variant has really changed the conversation, and we're having to come to terms with the fact that in some regions it may not be possible to suppress it. So the most important thing out of that is that everybody goes out, gets vaccinated, so we're in the best position to minimise the harm, and people can protect themselves, the people they love, their families, their friends, their neighbours, and take responsibility for others too.
Yeah. Catherine, what about you? Are you hearing that people have just had an absolute gutful? I mean, we see it on social media and people, say that these lockdowns are too much and we don't really like living in a tyrannical, place right now. Do you think that the protests are just seeing social media spill out into real life?
I think that, like everyone's tired of lockdowns, everyone's tired of homeschooling, but the most, that I see people doing are, they're just saying, well, we've got to get on with it. We know that, until we have mass vaccination, we just don't have a pathway out of this. I think the frustration is that we are where we are, having, the experience that we did last year, and we just didn't seem to learn the lessons. I know everyone likes to say, well, Delta's different. The thing that isn't different is we knew 18 months ago that we needed to vaccinate our population, and we needed to do it before winter. We all knew that. Everybody was saying it, and we just failed, and that's the problem. I think, though, with the protesters, no one wants to see this. I think we're all holding our breath, crossing our fingers that these are not super spreader events. I think it is inevitable, particularly in Melbourne, that there will have been cases in amongst that group, and it's devastating to see that they potentially have added to extending the lockdown for people, and I think people are pretty furious about that. I also just, I look at what the police had to put up with, and frankly, I just think our police officers shouldn't have to have dealt with something like that. They were put at risk both, for their physical and from COVID as well. And really, people need to understand that these, people have a right to protest in this country, but at the moment, the safest way of doing that is, email your federal and state MPs. Yeah. Have your voice heard that way? Just don't get out on the streets like this, because you're contributing to the problem. You're not fixing it for anybody, including the very things that you want to have happen.
Absolutely. Hey, Tim, I guess Catherine just mentioned it there when we speak about homeschooling. Do you think that these latest lockdowns will prompt the federal government to do more to support working families post-pandemic?
Well, what we've had is a partnership with the states and, of course, the federal government throughout this period to make sure that we're supporting households and families who need it throughout this pandemic, but it's on an understanding that if states are going to implement strong measures to suppress the virus, that they have to be responsible for carrying half the burden. So, of course, we're constantly reviewing the circumstances that are being played out, and we know many Australians are doing it tough, and the reality is they are, because there are people who are low income, might be temporary work, who are finding it difficult. There have, of course, been support mechanisms provided through the normal practice of Centrelink and the like, but, we're fully aware and cognizant of the fact that people are taking a hit. But this is more critical of why we need to move beyond this period where we're going through rolling lockdowns. That's one of the critical reasons why the federal government has turned around to the states and said, we not only ask you to sign up to a plan to broadly reopen when vaccination rates are met, a plan that they have agreed to, but more critically, to hold them to that agreement, because some of them are walking back from it and saying they'd rather rolling lockdowns and empowering government to keep people in their homes rather than empowering people to be able to go out and live their lives and have jobs. And the impact of this is human. It's critical and it's real. You know, young Australians should have the right to be able to go out and live their own life. You know, people who set up small businesses should have the freedom to be able to operate that small business and create jobs and provide opportunity for others. And of course, people who are retirees who've worked and sacrificed their entire life should have the opportunity to enjoy their sunset years. And so vaccination is the critical part of this conversation so that we can resume normal, or at least as close to normal as possible, so people can be able to get on with their lives. So if you haven't had the chance or you haven't decided to do so, please go out and get vaccinated and hold your state leader to the commitment they gave, not just to the Commonwealth, but to the nation, to you, to provide a pathway for reopening.
Catherine, I guess there is a federal election looming sometime in the next couple of months, and I think you hear the words, and I feel so sorry for families that have little ones work at home, where you hear working from home and homeschooling in the same sentence probably sends shivers down a lot of people's spines. What do you think that an elected Labor government would do to help ease the burden on working families around the country after we get out of this pandemic era?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is that I think it is really important that families, particularly low-income families, are given support now. It's important, as we see, you know, in Western Sydney, it is people who have less capacity to work from home that are also not contributing to the public health emergency. We need to actually make sure that support is there for them now. And this sort of notion that we're going to punish states who continue with public health measures because, is actually really counterintuitive from a public health model. You just should not do that. And I'm really disappointed, I guess, to hear Tim and the Prime Minister and the Treasurer making those sort of claims, because in fact it actually makes things worse. So they've got to be really careful about that. I think post-pandemic, we all know that some of the things that have contributed to this have been, we still have a gender pay gap in this country where women are earning far less than men. We know that childcare is just simply unaffordable for many families and just makes it not worth your while actually putting on extra hours, or one of you continuing to work when you have little ones in childcare is just not affordable. And we also know that insecure work substantially contributed to the spread of COVID, and that is driving, wages down. We've had wage stagnation. The fact that, in my own portfolio that we've had 2,500 Qantas workers just suddenly, made redundant, their jobs outsourced and put into insecure work is just horrendous. And the stories that you hear from those workers who've worked for that company, for some of them for over 30 years, is just simply devastating and not where we want to be as a country. So dealing with all of those issues, we've already announced our childcare policy. We've announced same job, same pay as a principle and a policy we want to pursue. We've announced a number of other measures in relation to families. And they're the sorts of things, if you're going to learn from a pandemic, you've actually got to make sure that you deal with the pandemic, but also I think people want things to be better afterwards. Now, in relation to the sort of states and territories and the Doherty report, I think that one of the things the government's going to have to very seriously look at, I don't think there are very many parents, particularly parents, I'm a parent of a secondary age student who's 13, I don't think many parents are going to be very comfortable with the country opening up if their kids are not vaccinated. And I think the government's got to understand that. I think we're now seeing, COVID for kids is not a mild illness. They might have milder COVID, but it is a really serious, awful illness. Talking to Senator Gallagher, whose daughter's dealing with this at the moment, it's horrendous. It's the most frightening thing I've ever heard a parent describe, the things that she's been going through. I think that there are not many parents in this country who are going to accept that Scott Morrison thinks it's okay for particularly secondary school students who are, a vaccine's been approved for them, are going to open the country up. And I think the Doherty modelling has to go back and have a look at that. And also the Doherty modelling was done at a time when we didn't have a large-scale outbreak as we have in New South Wales. So I think there's a bit more work to be done before you're going to see, people generally accept those figures.
Now, look, Catherine and Tim, I think you'll both agree to disagree on most issues that we've spoken about today, but I think we need to lighten the mood a little bit, and I think you'd both be thankful that you weren't in the West Australian Parliament when this happened this week.
The member for the Kimberley said that she would fight like a Chichuana to retain regional representation. Fight like a Chichuana to fight for regional representation.
Where is she?
Chichulau. I stand corrected on the pronunciation of the dog. She would fight like a Chichuau. They're fierce fighters, and that's her words. That's her words. Don't blame me.
Chihuahua.
Now that there was WA Liberal leader David Honey trying to say the word chihuahua in the chamber. Tim, I'm going to start with you. What's your most embarrassing blunder you've ever made in the chamber?
Well, I've had a similar experience where a word that I was very comfortable with, I nonetheless mispronounced and struggled. And it was actually only in the past couple of days. But, you know, that's the way it works. It's, you know, unfortunately, sometimes in the heat of the moment and when you're seeking to stand up and project and give a speech within a very confined time frame, you can sometimes mispronounce and your brain can sometimes not work as fast to correct itself. What was it? What was the word? No, now you're putting me on a spot, because I was remembering it was earlier in the week, but it was something like philosophical, and it was something completely straightforward, and I couldn't believe that I stuffed it up.
It's a tongue twister for sure. Catherine, quickly, you don't make many blunders, but what's a blunder you've made inside the chamber?
I think because we've had the reverse rules about voting, I think inadvertently I might have yelled out that I voted with the government by accident at one point. But so that's unlike me, to be honest. But I think I might have inadvertently voted with the A's instead of the nays or something at one point in time. But my absolute favourite was Graham Perrott when he realised he was up in the Fed chamber and had brought the wrong speech with him. And rather than just continuing on, he just continued to say, I've got the wrong speech for 10 minutes. It was well worth watching. It's funny.
Fair enough. Well, listen, Tim Wilson, thank you so very much for your time. Catherine King, thank you for your time. I know you guys are Polly's second and humans first, and I hope you're both taking care of you and your loved ones. So stay safe out there, and thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.